Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 24 plus balance changes, changing up the meta a lot with buffs, nerfs, reworks, and of course the 7 new hypercharges coming out. We're going to be ranking them from worst to best, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Getting close to 300k, and there's no better channel on YouTube in terms of Brawl Stars competitive gameplay, meta breakdowns, etc. You'll get it nowhere near as good anywhere else, so make sure to subscribe if you're not already. So we're going to be jumping into the balance changes first, and we're going to be jumping into the buffs. So we're starting off with Lily. So Lily actually received a nerf and a buff. I'm not too sure the nerf was in the patch notes, but I'm pretty sure it will make their final game. So her super damage is going from 2000 to 1000, but that's because she's receiving a slight rework to her main attack ammo. So she actually has 2 pieces of ammo now instead of 1. But this is absolutely game breaking. I think Lily will easily be an S tier brawler now. The reason being, literally, she has 2 pieces of ammo. She can just combine to deal insane amounts of damage. And it's the fact that her unload speed is actually really fast. Her reload speed is fast as well. Of course, she has very limited range, but essentially when you dash onto someone, they're literally dead every single time. So I really feel like Lily will skyrocket up the meta. So the next brawler receiving a buff is Janet. Her main attack damage is going from 1960 to 2000 damage. So this is going to break Janet. I mean, it's not really going to break Janet. Is it like a 40 damage buff, 2% damage buff in total? It's going to make Janet a little bit of a better option. The reason why they've done this, by the way, is because sometimes even like 5% changes to Janet's attack damage just breaks her in the meta. So I think they're slowly tweaking the numbers and trying to find that sweet spot. So I think she'll just be a tiny bit better. So next up on the buff list, we have Brock. He's receiving 2 buffs to his Hypercharge. His Hypercharge rocket damage is going from 500 per rocket to 750, so that's a 50% buff per rocket, which is looking fantastic. This Hypercharge just plain and simple sucked, and he's receiving a slight increase in the rocket spread through his Hypercharge, so that just allows him to actually get more damage. People thought his Hypercharge would be really good because it was in one solid point, but I think that actually works against him in some ways. So I think it's the perfect change, and we might actually see a lot more love and a lot more usage for Brock. The next brawler receiving a buff is Maisie. She's getting her super charge rate from super. It's going up from 112 to 125. So the numbers basically mean, I tested it out, nothing is changing in the interactions except for 1 interaction. So instead of needing to hit 2 people with her super and then a further 2 hits, she can actually now hit 2 people with her super and just need 1 more hit to then recharge her next super. So I don't think, again, it's going to make the biggest of differences. It's going to change a few interactions, but it's not going to really like skyrocket Maisie too far up the meta. Next up on the buff list, we have Mandy. So now she will only require 4 hits instead of 5 hits to get her super, which is actually a really big buff. And when she supers 2 people with her super, she'll actually get her super straight back, which is a really big change. Normally you need another hit after it. And then also if you hit 1 person with your super, you'll only need 2 hits after that instead of 3. So there's a lot of big interactions with Mandy. She's just going to be flying supers everywhere now. Super's still pretty hard to hit, but at least now you only need 4 hits to get that super. So I think she's going to improve a lot in this meta. And finally on the buff list, we have Hank. So I'm pretty sure they're reverting most of the HP that they took away with him in their last set of balance changes. His HP is going from 10,800 to 11,200. So that's a 4% HP buff. I feel like Hank actually is pretty underrated. I'm not even joking anymore. So we get a brand new title with Hank. We get this buff. It's time to go milk mode. So now we're going to be moving on to nerfs, and there's quite a few nerfs with these balance changes, which I actually really like because there's a lot of overtuned brawlers right now. And the first one is going to be Draco. So he's receiving a damage reduction nerf whilst his super is active. If you guys didn't know, he gets a speed boost and a damage reduction shield. The damage reduction is going from 25% to 15%. So I really like this change. To be honest, I'll just completely get rid of the damage reduction shield because it just doesn't make sense to get 2 buffs with your super and just have infinite ammo. But I think this will tone down Draco a little bit. So we have 2 nerfs with Angelo. So he's quite clearly, I would say, the first or the second best brawler in the game right now. He's receiving 2 big nerfs, but I still think Angelo will be pretty strong. So the first one is to do with his super charge rate. So it's going from needing 2 big hits, so 2 maximum charge hits, to 3 maximum charge hits to charge his super. I think that was a really underrated thing about him, the fact that he could just cycle through supers, constantly heal up, constantly deal poison damage. So that's a nice nerf, and that will of course affect his hypercharge rate, which we'll talk about later. And then his main attack damage is going from 4,400 to 4,000, so that's a 9% nerf to the attack damage. This is going to be a nice nerf, but I think with the hypercharge, I don't think Angelo's going to be removed from the S tier. So on the nerf list, we have Charlie. She's receiving 2 nerfs. I think this isn't going to put her out of like the A tier minimum for me. So the attack damage is going from 1,600 to 1,520. That is a 5% damage nerf, which isn't really going to impact things too much. It might change a few small interactions, but I think her super is the main reason why I use Charlie to shut people down, and I've not really tweaked that yet. And the Spider's gadget is being halved. So the Spider's gadget health reduction, it was 10 seconds, so that's how long it stayed on the field for. It's now going down to 5 seconds. So this is a great change because the Spider's gadget was still pretty toxic and pretty brainless. Next Brawl on the nerf list, we have Sandy. So he's receiving a nerf to his Hypercharge charge rate. It's going from needing 1.5 supers to get his Hypercharge in and around there to needing 2.5 supers to charge his Hypercharge. So this is like the perfect nerf for now because he could just fly through Hypercharges so quickly. And of course, a brawler like Sandy, it's going to impact him a lot getting constant Hypercharge supers. But I still think this isn't going to be enough to at least push him minimum A tier. Next up on the nerf list, we have Rico. So he's receiving a nerf to his multiple launcher gadget. It's going from 1,024 damage to 896 damage, which is a 13% damage nerf. The main reason being this Rico gadget was busted. I'll admit, as a Rico main, it was far too strong, and the fact that you could just spam it and just end up getting lots of kills, like 10k damage across the map, it was way too crazy. So he's receiving a Hypercharge though to balance things out. Next up on the nerf list, we have Kit. You guys will be glad to hear, especially if you play a lot of Showdown, his star power hungry is going from an additional 200% power to 150% power. I just think personally they need to rework this star power in the future. It just doesn't make sense to have a star power literally only solely for Showdown. I know there's a few other star powers like that, but you literally can't use this anywhere else. But for now, this is nice nerf and hopefully a rework in the future. In the final balance change, we have Melody. So her health is going from 8,200 to 7,200. That's a 1,000 reduction in her maximum HP, which is a 12% nerf, which is actually quite substantial. But at the same time, I think Melody's still going to be really strong because she still has 3 dashes. Her notes still deal insane damage. She's still got a shield that gives her like 2,000 extra health. I think she's going nowhere, and I think at least again minimum 8 tier. So now we're going to be going through the 3 brawlers that are receiving a rework and starting with the most broken one. And I honestly think with the Hypercharge as well, Frank will be one of the best brawlers in the game, if not the best. So Frank's rework, basically with Frank's attack speed, it increases with the percentage of health loss. So the lower the HP, the more, well, the less his attack delay and the more he's able to just spam out his attacks essentially. So the problem is, of course, when you're lower HP, you're quite vulnerable still with Frank. You still have to stand still. But at the same time, do you see how fast he's smashing his hammer when he's really low in health? You think about it, even still at like 50% of his health, he's still going to get an insane attack speed increase, and he's still going to have more HP than so many of the brawlers in the game. So for me, I just can't see past Frank being one of the best brawlers in the game with this rework. Next brawler that's receiving a rework is Meg, and she's receiving 4 changes. So the 2 buffs are going to be that she shoots more projectiles. I think she's going to shoot double the projectiles, and she's getting a small HP buff, 8% from 7,400 to 8,000 in Mecha. So there's some nice changes, but of course, to cancel out the additional damage, she's actually getting a shorter range, and damage per projectile is going down by about 20%. So 20% nerf in there, but of course she's receiving more projectiles, so her DPS is going to go up. Again, the way that you change the way that you play Meg is going to completely change, because normally you run Meg to counter snipers, you know, on maps like Shooting Star, out in the open, etc. Now I think she still might be decent against snipers because she still has a lot of HP, but I think she'll just be good against everything. My prediction is that Meg's probably going to be an S tier brawler because she deals so much damage. It's going to be crazy. Lastly, for the reworks, we have Chester's rework. So his Bella Mania star power is becoming baseline. So you have a 1, 2, 3, 4 bell sequence every single time. And then his new Bella Mania star power is that his first bell deals double the damage at 2,560. So essentially, you've got the 2 bell sequence attack damage into your first bell, which is actually pretty decent. But I think a lot of people will really overrate Chester because that Bella Mania star power is pretty decent. But the way you play Chester anyways, you still want to start off at the 2, 3, 4 sequence, right? Because you just want to maximize your damage output. You don't really want to be staying at the first bell, right? Of course, it's going to help him in a few situations. It's probably going to leapfrog him maybe up to like C tier, but nowhere near S tier. People definitely overestimate it because you've got to think as well, sneak peek star power hasn't been reworked as well, which is just absolutely terrible. So I think if they rework the sneak peek star power to something a little bit better, then Chester could be a lot better. Now we're going to be ranking all 7 new Hypercharges coming out in the game right now. I will say that it's pretty hard to test these completely easily out against bots, but I think I'll have a clear understanding once I play them in game when the update drops, so make sure to check that out. But at number 7 we have Gale, so Blizzard. So Gale's super will be much wider, it will fire off twice, and it will push people further back. So I think this will be a really strong Hypercharge, to be honest, but the big thing that really pushes it away from other Hypercharges is that it takes 3.3 supers to fully charge the Hypercharge super, which is a lot. It's 54 hits with his main attack. That's the thing that's going to hold it back, but it's still going to be pretty good, especially just to remove people from the objective. It's pretty good to just stun people twice, deal a lot of damage. I think this one could be underrated, and I think it's going to be pretty good. Next up, as the 6th best new Hypercharge coming to the game, we have Barley's Hypercharge called Bottled Up Rage. So whenever Barley uses Hypercharge super, he'll hurl 3 big brews, so 3 big puddles on the map. It'll also destroy grass as well, and it'll deal 2000 damage per tick, which seems a decent amount. I think the biggest problem is the delay with the super and how long it actually takes to charge your Hypercharge. So it takes 3 supers and 1 hit to charge this Hypercharge, which is 19 hits with Barley, which is pretty hard. I'm not too sure against good players that you'll really even get a Hypercharge in a game, to be honest, but it does have some big area denial. I don't think it'll be as strong as like other thrower Hypercharges like Dynamite, for example, but I think he'll of course be a bit stronger. I just don't think it's going to be game breaking. So now moving into the 5th best new Hypercharge coming to the game, we have Piper's Hypercharge called Boppin'. So Piper will throw out more bombs. I think it's 6 bombs, and she will also get an increased speed in the air, so essentially she won't be just flying in the air for a long time. She'll actually be able to drop quite quickly, which is a bonus, and she'll also destroy terrain when she lands. So I think they've reworked this from the Brawl Talk. I'm pretty sure the Brawl Talk is when you land on someone, you knock them back, which I thought was just way too strong. So this is the reason why Piper's a little bit lower, and it takes about 3 supers to charge this Hypercharge. It takes about 2 to 3 supers to charge it, 7 hits at maximum range. I think it's going to be pretty decent just because of the stat boost. You get a 25% damage boost and 26% speed, but the problem with Piper is that she doesn't have a good super, really, right? I think that's going to be a big problem, and that's what the Hypercharge is about. But I think people will just use it for the stat boost, and I think she's going to get even better, probably return it to the S tier. It's just the Hypercharge super itself isn't going to be that strong. So now moving into the 4th best new Hypercharge, we have Ems's Hypercharge called Overhyped Haze. So whenever you use Ems's Hypercharge, you will knock back opponents within the Hypercharge super, and it will also spray out her spray all around her super circle, which deals about 300 of damage or so, which isn't a lot, but just the knockback effect itself is really strong. The super gets bigger as well, and I think that's going to be the really strong thing about it, because you'll just be able to control a lot of the map. Imagine this with a Hype Star power, for example. You're just going to get so much healing, and then you can cycle through to your next super so incredibly quickly. The only thing that's going to stop this from becoming really, really strong, like a Sandy Hypercharge, for example, is the fact that it takes 30 hits to build up this Hypercharge, which is 3.3 supers, which is a lot when you think about it. I know it's Ems, but I think good players will be able to stop Ems from getting close because she has very limited range. But against bad players, this is going to be really strong, and I think this will definitely improve Ems's strength in the meta. So now jumping into the 3rd best Hypercharge coming to the game right now, we have Angelo's Hypercharge called In My Element. So whenever you pop a Hypercharge super, it will follow you wherever you go. This might seem boring, but this is going to make Angelo even better. Even though he's receiving 2 nerfs, the Hypercharge super is just crazy. So the only bad thing about it is that it takes 12 maximum hits to get this Hypercharge, so 4 supers to get the Hypercharge. But the fact that you can just run around, get healed, whilst also chasing the opponents with more poison damage, is going to be a very strong Hypercharge. So now moving into the 2nd best new Hypercharge coming into their game with the update, we have Rico's Hypercharge called Trickshot King. So his super projectiles will bounce further, which sounds pretty boring, but it is pretty strong. You think of the mutations with Rico, for example, that's the level we're getting at with this Hypercharge super. So the way that you want to use it is just bounce it across as many walls as possible. You don't just want to aim for the opponents and use the Hypercharge super like that. It will deal some good damage, but you won't get as much value. You just want to bounce it across many walls as possible. The projectiles are just going to be flying everywhere, and it's going to be insane. I feel like this will be a very toxic Hypercharge, and it's the fact that as well, it takes 2.5 supers to charge this Hypercharge, which is insane. That's about 30 Rico hits, which again, I cycle through supers a crazy amount with Rico, so I'm just going to be able to delete everyone. I feel like Rico could quite easily be like an S-tier brawler with his Hypercharge. So now moving into the best new Hypercharge coming with the update, we have Frank's Hypercharge. So whenever you use a Hypercharge super with Frank, around him in a complete circle, he will use his super, which is just absolutely crazy broken. It looks insane. Pair this with his rework. Surely he has to be the best brawler in the game. I'm not even joking anymore. I think quite clearly he will be the best. You also got to consider as well, he gets 26% speed boost, 25% shield boost. Also, because he's a tank, he charges his super and his Hypercharge automatically through taking damage, which is just going to help him even more. And it's the fact that it takes 7 hits to get his Hypercharge, so that is 2.33 supers to build up his Hypercharge. You're just going to cycle through Hypercharges like crazy. It's got to be a Frank meta, and I'm very scared about it. And lastly, before we end off the video, I'm just going to take a look at the map pool changes, because I think this dictates a lot whether I'm going to have fun pushing trophies, etc. One thing I'd like to note is that the amount of maps in rotation across certain game modes is changing. A lot of them are changing. So Bounty is going from 4 to 6. Brawl is going from 8 to 12. Gem Grab 8 to 12 maps. Heist 4 to 6. Hot Zone 4 to 6. Knockout and Showdown 8 to 12. So a lot of maps added, which I think is a good idea, just to keep the game as fresh as possible. You don't want too many maps, you don't want too little maps. So going to be starting off with Gem Grab then. So there's 2 new maps that have been added, which is Sneaky Sneak and Ahead of the Curve. So let's take a look at those. Sneaky Sneak looks like an okay-ish map. I mean, there's a lot of open area, which I like. And then Ahead of the Curve, I think this is a returning map. Yeah. Oh no, it's a new map. This is one of the new maps. It looks like the pirate environment, which is pretty good. And Double Swoosh and Minecart Madness are being re-added back to the rotation. And then moving on to Showdown. So with Showdown, I believe Leaping Frogs and Final Four are the new maps. So that's going to be Leaping Frogs, which is, it looks alright with the launch pads. It looks okay. Final Four, that looks like a pretty good Showdown map as well. And maps being re-added back to the rotation is a Flying Fantasies and Safety Center. And next we have, I mean, Trophy Escape isn't actually returning, but it's still in the rotation. Then we have Heist, we have Diamond Dome and Double Locking, which are the 2 new maps. Diamond Dome looks weird. I don't think that will play out too well. And Double Locking, I straight away don't like walls in front of a high safe. That just never really plays out too well. In terms of Bounty then, I think we have 2 new maps with Flank Attack and Iris Intervention. So it's going to be this map. Straight away don't like how you're spawning in the corner, but it looks like a half decent map. And then Flank Attack, that looks actually like a pretty good bounty map. I'm excited to try that one out. With Brawl, we have 2 new maps and 2 returning maps. So Penalty Kick and Pinball Dreams is returning. And then we have Offside Trap and Spider Crawl. Those are going to be the 2 new maps. So this one looks awful. That looks very bad, I will say straight away. I know that's not going to play out well. And then Spider Crawler looks okay-ish. I don't know. It's going to be a good recon map. That's all I care about, right? We have the Paint Brawl maps, which I'll show you guys now just quickly in case you're wondering about this. I think Paint Brawl will be pretty fun. I'm excited to try it out. Oops, I didn't mean to click that. There's actually a lot of Paint Brawl maps. I'm guessing they're really going to try and push this. There's a lot of them to go through. I mean, the maps do play a big part on whether the game mode will actually be good or not. Hot Zone, we have 2 new maps with Reflections and Local Business. That one looks okay. Don't look too bad. Local Business, that doesn't look too bad either. That just looks like, is it Gold on Gooch, pretty much, but it's just with a few twists, essentially. Knockout, we have 4 new maps, I believe. We have Island Hopping, I think that's a new one. Island Hopping, yeah, Island Hopping is definitely, what on earth is going on my screen there? Well, Angelo and Eve are going to be very good on that map. We have Hard Lane, which is a new one. I don't know what's happening to the game I love. We have Twilight Passage and Dragon Jaws. So these are 2 maps right here. I mean, that's okay, I guess. And Dragon Jaws, okay, I guess. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh no, we have Wipeout as well, if we can get over to Wipeout. Duels hasn't changed whatsoever. We have 2 maps that have been removed, the Great Open and Quad Damage. And then we have Spice Production,